Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're coming in hot for this episode because I'm currently triggered. I figured it might be worthwhile for you to feel what I feel like, triggered, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, you channel and you're calm and you're loving. And I am those things often, but I'm also human. And right now being human means that there are some things that come up, and those things come up and they get us a little fired up because the emotion of anger is becoming. So all those triggers that are sprinkled all over the game board right now is a whole lot of becoming for our civilization. And the faster we allow this to be true and to be okay and for us to express these things, the more fun a lot of this is going to be. So I promise in my trigger, I'm not going to, tear things down, although sometimes we want to. Instead, what I'm going to do is try to reach into the depths of what it is that I am becoming and let it out, which is really the epitome of flowing with the power of anger. We have grown accustomed to being afraid of or avoidant of anger because that was limiting. And as we transition into a full embrace of this emotion, the expressions of these emotions will change. The emotional expression of anger through limitation is what was destructive, because limitation is disconnective. And the emotional expression of anger through allowance will be constructive, because allowance is connective. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is this word illusion that I hear thrown about in so many interviews that I hear right now about humanity and about other beings and about time and the structure and the fabric of our reality. There's sort of this off-the-cuff dismissal where we say, time is an illusion. Now, as with many words in our reality, there are only so many manifestations of the words to represent different energies. So there are times when we could say it's an illusion, and it might be really uplifting or reassuring. And then there might be times when we say it's just an illusion, as in, you poor sob of a human, you have been totally deceived. So I'm talking about this latter version of the word illusion, where we say, oh, you got all spun up on that thing about time when, time's just an illusion. And it makes you kind of feel like, fuck, what do I believe about anything, right? It's a little bit dismissive of the perspective that had believed in linear time, that had experienced time in that way. Do you feel the difference? Feel the difference between someone saying, as you come to a new point in your spiritual awakening, right, where you realize that there might be different ways to mold or work with or experience time, and then they say, yeah, time's just an illusion. Do you feel how that is not exactly empowering, embracing, allowing? It's a little bit rejectionary of the previous perspective that you held on your way to this juncture and your crossroads. There's a lot of this on the spiritual journey. There's a lot of times that we get to a new crossroads or a new understanding, and there's something in the water that makes people want to dismiss all the previous perspectives that got us there, even if it's subconscious, and it often still is, because that is an expression of limitation as we transition into this full allowance. Okay, so I want to say it slightly differently and feel if you can feel the energy shift in this perspective. So as you come to this crossroads in your awakening, I might say, yeah, time's fluid. Isn't that amazing? And because of the different ways and perspectives that you've held through time and are still able to remember, it will appear more fluid to you now than ever because you're still connected to the ways you had viewed it and the ways you are viewing it now. And so because of that, you have access to a greater fluidity, a greater malleability of the concept of time. Do you see how that adds in everything that you are? It's not like, yeah, you idiot, you thought it was linear, sucks to be you, right? It's not any of that. It's like, yeah, you got here. And because you still remember those other perspectives and you see who you are now and whatever, you have expanded. And through that expansion, time feels more flexible because you are getting more flexible. Okay, so let's take another example. Really fired up. We're going to pound through them today. Tired of this disallowing of human perspective as we awaken, and I will stand toe to toe with any other civilization who has anything to say about humanity and how much we were at the bottom of the totem pole, and I will flip that totem pole upside down and I will say it is all just perspective and humanity has equal right and equal footing with any other civilization that's out there, depending upon how you look at it. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is something I've heard recently about quantum entanglement, maybe I'll say specifically, but also this idea of past lifetimes and different versions of ourselves. Okay, this is completely related to the topic for this season, which is distance. As distance begins to collapse, or said another way, as connection begins to expand, there is a tendency still alive within us coming from that singular perspective place that will reduce the new and varied perspectives that we are coming into contact with into a singularity. Now, this is where the definition of human gets a little broad, because remember, from the chorus's perspective, anybody who shares this bundle of beliefs could be called human. Anyone who looks kind of like us could be called human. One of their main questions at the end of book 1 was really to present this to us in a new way, which was really to challenge our idea of what's a human by saying, well, up until now, you've based it on sort of what you've known or what you've perceived with the 5 senses. So anyone who sort of lived on this planet in this time period and kind of looked like this was considered a human. But by their view, anybody who shares these beliefs and somewhat maybe even represents this way on 5 senses frequencies could all be considered human. Now, there are some other civilizations in the universe who are not flattered by being included in this definition. Because they came here perhaps to just investigate us and perhaps to just learn about us. And they considered themselves very different and perhaps very advanced. And so when they come here and they find out that there's a channel and that channel brought down this loving message and that loving message may point to deeper connections between us and those visitors, it comes as a little bit of a shock or perhaps even just a little bit distasteful. Okay. And we can understand that, right? Haven't we all been in a place where we thought we knew the thing or we thought we were coming in a particular role and then the role gets changed or the things we thought we knew get turned upside down? We've all been there. It's kind of bumpy. Okay, but the point being that version of singularity crops up again as we step out into the universe. Those first footsteps outside of our door will be to come into contact with different civilizations. Now, by the chorus's view, they might just be cousins, very similar types of humans, because they're not at all chorus, they have a body, they're here. We see them on the 5 senses as we expand in our perception of our 5 senses. They were neighbors. As we say in season 2, these are considered energetic neighbors to us by the chorus. So here we go, out our door, 1 step, 2 step. And we bump into this other civilization, these aliens, whatever you want to call them. And there will be something within us that will recognize this new connection, and it will limit it, meaning it will reduce it back to a singularity. It will not be the only part of us that is alive and well in that moment. There will be other aspects of us that feel the expansiveness, that feel the burgeoning recognition of more things that we are each and are capable of doing. However, there will also be a part of us that says, hang on, maybe this is the same thing. And that part of us will translate that singularity, that sameness into a variety of different explanations. One of which being, oh, you and I must be the same higher self, the same larger person. We're just fractals of something else. Now, in some cases, that definition and that explanation may feel very enlightening to people or very allowing or very connective, which is the point. But in other cases, what it does is actually reduce the expression of your uniqueness and the understanding of what you are as an individual and infinitely valid expression of creation. So let's say I walk out the door and I meet Katie from another galaxy. And I'm like, whoa, wow, we have a lot in common. And oh my gosh, are you just me from another galaxy in another timeline? Now, do you see how in that recognition, what I am somewhat doing is reducing the representation of myself as an earthling human? I am sort of seeing our connections, and those connections begin to become the focus. Does that make sense? Focus, as you know, is a narrowing of energies based on the chorus's definition. So I go from being like, dun, 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 individual Katie stepping out into the universe to meeting something almost immediately that I would view as a proxy for myself. And I become potentially more enthralled in understanding that connection and that higher version that we both came from than in continuing to express the uniqueness that I am. As we talked about last week in a couple episodes this season, humanity, however you define it, right? Maybe there's several of these civilizations that the chorus is looking at as quote unquote human. Humanity has a tendency to turn around. So here we all go out into the universe, infinitely unique expressions of creation, and we come through this experience of limitation, and then we say, hold on a sec. We must all be different reflections of the same one thing. And we turn around and we try and figure out the one thing. And the chorus would say, well, isn't this fascinating? You all stepped out the door and connected even more into the vastness of the universe, and what you found in your initial connections was ways to reduce the unique expressions of yourselves. Now, let's get down to brass tack for a second, because I'm introducing this as a overarching theme or an overarching topic, and that's somewhat easy to relate to. But let's talk about a specific for a second, and it might be easier to feel what it is that I'm expressing. So let's say you go out the door, and there's this alien, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. You guys do stuff differently, and you've got all this technology on your spaceship, and how do you do that? And what's that like? And they say, wow, this is really interesting. You guys have all sorts of weird emotions, and we've never seen this before. And what's that like? And how do you do that? Seems very friendly, get to know you, doesn't it? And let's say that maybe they start inviting you more and more into their place, into their places, into their way of life. And you're like, wow, this is pretty great. They don't get as sick. They live longer than we do. They seem more in connection with the universe or time travel or you name it. And day after day, you get to know their civilization better, their people better, and you're just continually amazed. It's like everything you do there is next level, and then it's next level again, and then you go underwater and you go to the poles and you go to all these places, and it just keeps getting more amazing. And then you hear phrases like, oh, well, it was that's just an illusion, and time, how you viewed it, isn't really time, and we're just all projections, and you're a fractal of this one larger thing, and I'm a fractal of this one larger thing, and slowly over time, the things that you used to believe, feel, like they've lost their luster. They fade. They're less a part of you. They're less present. You're dazzled by these new things that you're experiencing, and maybe in some ways are coming to look very differently at your human life. Now, how could this not be natural? Anytime we're exposed to a new and different perspective, it becomes factored into our belief systems. That's not actually what I'm questioning. What I'm questioning is which part of you is directing which part of the connections that you're starting to make. Look, I get it. I think we all thought we'd get to a certain point in awakening and then the done button would just go off. We would have been awakened. I mean, now we're meeting other civilizations and we're having crazy experiences and we feel awake, don't we? And from a certain vantage point, that is infinitely true. But from another vantage point, these are the earliest days of the conscious portion of this awakening. And meeting others who are also awakening is barely the first steps out the door. Our human perspective, as we have understood it, in this limited, didn't know anything else was out there or even wondered about it for large portions of our history, is coming to a close. And that is well and good and part of the expansive path. But it's not something we reject and leave behind. As soon as we start to feel like the unique expressions of what we are here are somehow less than any other expressions that we encounter in the universe, we are in some ways limiting those new connections that we are finding. From an allowing place, what would happen is that we would become perhaps more in love with, more aware of, more dazzled by our own path and the place that we're coming from. They would both be held in equal turn. And this is where you might feel it. If those new beings that you had come into contact with finally said to you one day after all of these amazing experiences, "We got to go now. Do you want to just come with us and never go back?" The question is not problematic. Your answer could never be problematic, for there are infinite paths in this infinite universe. But reach inside of yourself and become aware of what you might feel in that moment. Is it a relieved yes? Oh, thank God I can get out of this horrible planet. I can leave this awful human experience and jet off into the stars in this spaceship. Or is it such an open allowance of everything that you are that the thought had never occurred to you that you would ever need to leave in order to achieve and experience the fullest aspects of connection, of wonder and marvel in this universe? So much so that when they ask you, "Would you want to leave and come with us?" you might say, "Why would I ever need to leave anything?" From that place are born very different solutions to distance. From that place, there is an instantaneousness of perception and connection that is created by you, irregardless of any technology that anybody else holds or has manifested. For you are the keeper of your kingdom. You are connected to your fullest, most unique expressions of yourself at every step in your existence. And each step of discovery is not a step of leaving anything. It's a step of understanding the full power which you hold. My path has taken me sort of in the opposite direction. I hear these incredible stories about contact with other alien species and races, and I don't have any of that. sure, I've talked to the Federation, and there have definitely been conversations, and I know there have been conversations that I have forgotten. But the conscious part of my path this past period has been with this ancient voice or voices that come through at these ancient sites. There's so much to tell, and sometimes I'm baffled why I haven't started telling it yet here in the podcast. I trust that these stories are going to come through in the times that they are most expansively coming through for any and all who will hear them. And maybe we're just not at that time yet. Or maybe they're just better suited for the book, the third book. But I can at least summarize this last year by saying that each time I went to one of these ancient sites, climbed one of these mountains, experienced these other ancient, invisible civilizations, I caught glimpses, visions in my heart of the way that this used to be. When I sang their songs, I could hear their voices join me. I felt presences in the woods, in the water, in the stones, and in the sky. The way things were, the way they used to work, became more and more clear to me, so much so that at times I felt like I could reach out and touch it. And at times I practically did. I won't get into the details now, but stuff came out of me and through me that was practically tangible. As you can imagine, after months of this, I felt like I was basically on the cusp of reaching through the veil and holding the hands of everyone on the other side. It felt like the direction that I had been going and needed to go, and yet something was also resistant in me. I was holding back for some reason. I didn't really understand why. And in fact, as I sat down and reflected on it, I realized that some of the more magical experiences had happened in my earliest expeditions and had become more and more restrained over time. I thought that was perhaps my human self coming through. Perhaps I was breaking it down. Perhaps I was making it more limited. Perhaps I was somehow finding a way to fit it into this group consensus and this reality, as I've been told many times is part of my job or the way that I do things. And then one day, through a very loving friend, I received an energetic message that basically went something like this. What are you trying to figure out? What are you trying to see in those ancient times? What are you trying to grab for in those other frequencies and pull into this frequency? Why is that there? And very lovingly, they continued to point out that those places, though they exist and existed, are not this place. And though I may have at this juncture in time a very clear understanding of the ways that we structured earth, mountains, natural elements, realities back then, there is a key and important difference between resurrection and birth. In fact, they went so far as to put it in a really friendly way and say, that was the 3rd grade. This is the 9th grade. Stop trying to go back to the 3rd grade. Do you know what? As the immensity of what they were saying sunk in, I finally recognized that resistance and I started to cry. Grief being a release of beliefs, as we all now know from the chorus's perspective. I realized that there was some part of me that wanted to go backward, that wanted to reach through all of these contacts and all of these amazing ancient places and just pull in or pull me out of this and go back to that place. And the resistance which I felt, which all that time I thought I was trying to get over, was the part of me that was still expressing the unique aspects of me here in this time, in this realm and reality. it was the part of me that loved this and that didn't want to go. It was the part of me that perhaps wasn't aligned to having all this magical stuff come out of my fingertips, because that was an old magic from a different place that was not an expression of who I am here and now. The human Katie, the Katie that's sort of coming out of the depths of limitation. The Katie that is not magical and goes to the grocery store and fumbles around in her human body. The Katie that cannot ride the wind through the sky, manipulate matter, or move water with her voice. Though I have had experiences of each one of these things, that was coming from a place that I was and that we used to be. And isn't it funny how whenever we feel resistance, we're sure it's a bad thing and something that has to be perhaps overcome? And in this case, it was love. It was the love that was keeping me here. It was the allowance of this place and everything that it is, as imperfect as it always is. And it called me back to my unique expression. The total sum of all parts that I am and have been, the ones I can remember and the ones that I can't, and what I am building now in a forward direction that is totally new and unknown. I am not calling into question anyone's decision that has ever been made or will be made about which direction to go when these connections start to be made, or when they already have been. I'm simply pointing out the sensations inside of us that we will each feel when we are brought to these crossroads. There is beauty and miracles in every aspect of what you are as your human self. And when you begin to see what was built by us, perhaps in other times, or when you see what was built by them, perhaps on their frequencies and their places in time, it will be incredible. But if you feel something inside of you calling you forward even still, it is the part of you that is in contact and deep connection with infinite love. And that infinite love calls you forward to your next greatest creation. We love you infinitely. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.